Good afternoon. We're going to call the Tax Committee to order. Okay, so Representative Norton is here, and I apologize, members. I think we did not post this correctly. It's information only because we sent off House File 409 to the Capital Investment Committee, but we want to continue with members' questions on the proposal, and it is a big proposal with lots of moving parts. And I just want to take people back to where we were in this committee last time, which was we heard a full presentation on the original proposal from the DMC, Representative Norton's bill, and then we only got through a few members' questions. I think Representative Marquardt asked a question, maybe someone else, and I did, and then we had to adjourn. So now we want to pick up where we left off, and I know a lot of members had asked me since we've been together with this proposal on both sides of the aisle that they still have questions they want to ask, so we're glad you're back. And I think we worked through all your testifiers, Representative Norton. I don't know if you had additional ones today, but we want to continue on learning about the proposal. Representative Norton, welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for having us back into the committee. We want to let you know, I'm not going to go through the full presentation again. You heard my comments, my opening comments last time. They haven't changed. The bill that is sort of in front of you today also hasn't changed. But we want to let you know that we heard concerns from the chair, from members of the committee, from folks even over in the Senate about some concerns they had about the funding mechanism. And so the Mayo Clinic folks, the City of Rochester folks, myself, Representative Blinchesky, and some of the great staff we have here have been working to try to find what I think affectionately is being called Plan B or Plan A+, depending on what you think of it when we're done. So that work is underway. We continue to talk, and we're hoping today to have the opportunity to make just a few comments and then answer any questions you have that you didn't get to last time, concerns or comments, and then we'll just let you know that we're going back to the table or continuing to work on that Plan B and hopefully have something for you very, very shortly.
Great. Thank you so much, Representative Norton, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Brad Nahr. I've been a physician at the Mayo Clinic for 33 years. I'm chair of the Department of Anesthesiology, and I'm a member of the governing board of the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. I am a lifetime Minnesotan. I live in Minnesota as of today because of MnDOT. There's no way I could have gotten anywhere today without the expertise that they have, and I thank the security guard in the transportation building as soon as I got here. I saw the Star and Tribune article about 49 states at 5:30 this morning. Did any of you guys see it? Oh, yes. I just want to assure you that I'm here representing a project that we think is very, very good for the state of Minnesota for the coming decades. In brief, it's a $3 billion investment by Mayo Clinic private capital, $2 billion in other private capital just to keep up with that investment, and then infrastructure supplement because of the size of the city of Rochester. We're listening to you. We're revising our plans. We want to do what's best for the state of Minnesota and our patients. We set another record this week. There's a young man from 15 miles east of here that's been on a totally artificial circulation for 160 days waiting for a heart transplant. He walks every day. He's with his mother. He's interacting with his environment. But he's been on what we call ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. All of his blood comes out of his body, it goes through an oxygenator, then it goes back into him. And he's living waiting for the transplant. We don't have too much longer to do that, but that's the kind of things that we do. Thank you all for your consideration of this proposal.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Nahr, for being with us. We appreciate it. Representative Norton.
And Madam Chair, I saw some questioning faces. Not everyone, we've all been busy here, has seen the news, but Dr. Noseworth is the CEO of Mayo Clinic, was on at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. talking, and there was an article covering some comments he made, and so that's in reference to 49 states would love to have Mayo Clinic. I think we're lucky to be the one that does, and hopefully we can keep it here and growing. We do have a number of people in the audience, and I don't know how many or if any of them, came here specifically to testify, but I know they're here to answer any questions. We have representatives from the Chamber. We have representatives from READY, our Rochester Area Economic Development Center. We have Labor. We have, just a plethora of folks behind us that could come forward. So, Madam Chair, if you would just like to have your members ask questions and then allow whomever is appropriate to come down.
Representative Norton, I think we do want, quite a few people have questions, so I think if we can start with them, and we can weave people in to tell us what they need to tell us, and if that's okay with members, to at least start. I should say somebody's phone was just triggering the sound system there around the table, so just reminding members, if you have a cell phone, please turn it off, because it makes it difficult for folks who are watching from home, and that's where it actually really, and I understand, Representative Norton, the reason I'm extra asking this is I understand this is being televised statewide today because of folks' interest. So I really want to make sure that folks who would be watching this from any part of the state could actually see this hearing and hear what people are saying. So thank you for that. And so we're going to start with, I can't read this, Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have 3 topic areas, and I don't know how you want to handle it, if you want me to do it all at once or one at a time. Well, when I met with folks representing the DMC proposal, we'll take the first one first. Sounds great. I've got an affection for Rochester. I've got an affection for Mayo's. And what the picture that came to my head was a lovely island that, as the doctor pointed out, if it weren't for the highways today, you wouldn't be able to get here. And if I'm sick and I'm flying in from wherever because Rochester has moved from number 1 or number 2 in the country to number 1 or number 2 in the world as the place I want to be when I'm sick, I'm not sure that I want a long car ride. How do I get there? It seems like you're building an island and you're not dealing with how I get from wherever I am to Rochester, Minnesota.
Dr. Narr or Mr. Dunn or Representative Norton? Who'd like to take that? Welcome. Would you introduce yourself for the tape?
Madam Chair, committee members, I'm Bob Dunn, president of the Hammes Company. We're the lead consultant for Mayo Clinic on the DMC project. You raise a very important question that we need to give real consideration and thought to over time as it relates to the regional transportation system that will continue to serve Rochester in years to come. The challenge that we're going to face is today total visitation to Rochester between what Mayo generates and what the community generates is right about 7 million visits a year, significant number. That's going to grow to about 12 million visits a year if the DMC project goes forward. That's real growth on a community that already struggles with its ability to bring people to and from Rochester. That said, within the DMC proposal, the concentration of development and investment is really about building the destination. And to a certain degree, you're right. We are building an island there. I think the next most important issue that we're going to have to deal with over time, and this will take years, is to formulate a regional strategy to significantly improve the means by which we can move people into and out of Rochester, whether that becomes improvements at the airport, the roadways, rail. I think it's fair to say all alternatives will have to be considered, and there will be continuing investment that will be needed in order to keep Rochester from truly becoming an island that people are not willing to go through the effort on a day like today that it would take to get there.
Representative
Thank you, and I appreciate the answer, Mr. Dunn. I'm just not sure that we can get the cart or get the horse that far ahead of the cart and have it actually work, to use a transportation analogy. I think we need to tighten up the relationship between the work on the DMC proposal and the work on how you actually get people there. Because I would imagine a significant number of those 7 million visits a year, by no means all, but a meaningful number, are Minnesotans. And that's all good. But I assume that 5 million growth that you're projecting are primarily non-Minnesotans.
Very much so.
So we need to, I don't think we can say, well, we'll deal with this year, and a few years from now, let's look at, gosh, how are we going to get people there? So,
well, and just to close that point, one of the things, if you look at how the bill has been drafted, one of the first things that will happen is we have to create a comprehensive development plan. And what we would propose right away, as that development plan is drafted, that we would look at regional transportation as one of the most important elements that has to be analyzed, and a plan has to be established going forward. So this isn't something that can wait 10 years.
Okay. Representative Dabney.
Thank you. One of the pieces that has been a consistent part of the messaging around the DMC is I'll use the term quality of life, maybe it's entertainment, maybe it's hospitality, something like that, that as great a place as Rochester is, it lacks something that holds and attracts patients when they're not being treated and are, out and about in the community, and family when they're visiting, as well as lacks something as a attractor for staff of all sorts. And in fact, I was listening to a national call-in show a couple of months ago, I think maybe even before this proposal came up, and the theme of the show is how do you attract new young workers, the sort of folks we all want to attract. And this guy called in from Arizona, and he said, yeah, I'm a tech guy, so I'm the kind of guy everybody wants to hire. I got the skills. A year ago, I got my dream job working for the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Well, he was calling from Arizona. And he said, girlfriend and I moved there, and we loved it for the first 6 months, and then there was nothing to do. So we moved back to Arizona. Now, he's a tech guy, so he continues to work for the clinic because he can telecommute or do, I don't know, whatever magic they do these days. I have not seen anything in the proposal that while you folks have messaged that this is an issue, so it's not just a guy on the radio, it's you guys messaging that this is an issue in attracting talent and in attracting patients and families, that speaks to that issue in your proposal.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please, Representative Norton.
And I will let Bob Dunn speak to the proposal that we have, but hopefully the committee has received the list. I know it went to the chair after our last meeting of all the proposals, as well as kind of the conceptual idea of the things that this DMC is going to bring to our community, and it addresses exactly what you're talking about. It is building out the downtown area and the infrastructure, but it also will address the cultural, educational, and other aspects of life that not only visitors, but also the citizens and the employees at Mayo Clinic will need. So that is the core of this public infrastructure. I also, before I hand it off, just wanted to talk briefly to your last question and remind members, and I'm not sure everyone knows, but Rochester does have an international airport, albeit very small. We do have an airport, and a significant number of Mayo Clinic's patients, and certainly the new patients they hope to bring, will come from out of state and out of the country. And so that, the Mayo Clinic made that airport happen a number of years ago, and I think handed it off to the city who takes care of it, manages it. But that was actually Mayo many, many years ago being proactive and thinking of transportation, and this proposal continues to do that. And for some members it's not fleshed out enough, but as Bob was saying, the real proposal, they have ideas and thoughts, but the real proposal has to be developed as this project moves along by folks in our community as well. So he can address the rest of your...
Mr. Dunn.
Madam Chair, committee members, you've sort of gotten at the essence of what the DMC proposal is all about. We spent better than 2 years researching both sides of the ledger that you mentioned in your question, one being the visitor, whether it's patient or caregiver. There's a substantial number of people that come to Rochester because of the clinic. But we also measured the local resident base, because in order for these things to sustain themselves, we can't rely totally on the visitor to drive the business models that will support restaurants and civic uses and what have you. And consistently in that research, what we learned was Rochester today, while a great community, is woefully inadequate of the things that people expect who are traveling there because of the clinic or who reside there. And you gave a great example yourself of someone that lived that experience, moving to Rochester and quickly realized that it's not as vibrant a community as many communities around the country. So in order to solve that dilemma, we need to build community infrastructure, and that is as broadly defined as it can be. It's everything from educational uses, civic uses, urban spaces, commercial, high-tech, hospitality. All of these things, we define them by 7 programmatic elements. All of those things have to be built in Rochester in order for Rochester to become the type of urban destination that people will be comfortable traveling to and moving there to reside and build their career. And what we learned was 80% of the time, using the patient as an example, 80% of the time that a patient and caregiver spends in Rochester because of Mayo is spent outside the four walls of the Mayo Clinic. That's an awful lot of time to spend in Rochester if there are not the programmatic elements that you can get when you're at home. That's a lot of idle time. We have to close that gap, and that's what the DMC is intended to do.
Okay, thank you. We have lots of people. You have one more?
Okay. I can hold and maybe come back later.
Okay,
Thank you,
we'll do
Madam
that. We'll add to the.
Thank
We have a
you.
lot of people on the list.
I appreciate that.
Representative Norton, I want to apologize. I did not have those letters put in the packets and copies made, and you're referencing them, so we're getting them sent to duplicating right now, and members will see them soon, but we do not have them in front of members, so everybody will see that list shortly. Representative Davids, then Earhart, Garofalo, Les Schoen. Representative Davids.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I've got a series of questions here and a few comments. First of all, I was looking in the Post Bulletin online, and I'd like to get a few things cleared up for the record so members know exactly where we're at. And there was a legislator that quoted regarding the Rochester sales tax that I carried the bill and was able to pass into law 2 years ago, in which the voters of Rochester passed with about 62.5% vote. And the quote is, "It was done regarding the sales tax in the first place as a stick in Rochester's eye." Now that would hurt. That's very painful. And I want to assure the committee and everyone listening that that was certainly not the case. I'm not sure how it could be a stick in someone's eye when they were given, other than Duluth, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the largest sales tax in state history. And I would say, had I not been the chair of the committee, that would not have happened. And I'm not criticizing Chair Linchesky or Representative Marquardt. You had a moratorium on sales tax. You had reasons for doing that. I didn't. And we passed. I'm not criticizing the chairs during that time whatsoever, because that was your policy. I respect that. But had I not been the taxer at the time, we wouldn't even be talking about this today. So let's figure that. So it leads me into, well, then another member, well, it happens to be Representative Liebling, said that I hope the stress of the session has not been too much for Rep. Davids. I disagree with him on tax policy, but I wish him all the best. And I really do appreciate that, Representative Liebling, because if we couldn't be friends, it could cause me more pain than my heart could bear. And I'm glad that you're looking out for my well-being. But just please remember that I don't feel stress. I generally cause it. So just so that's right. Then there was a bit of a troubling statement from Representative Norton. It says, it's always important to realize that Davids bears some of the responsibility for this move, and this move is taking $5 million that is scheduled to go out to the surrounding cities around Rochester, the Greg Davids Good Neighbor policy. It is also important to realize that Davids bears some of the responsibility for this move because he has drawn the ire of some Democrats with recent statements blasting the governor and DFL leaders for not doing enough to support Mayo Clinic's DMC plan. Well, isn't that precious? I am out there pushing a bill that I believe in. I'm out there pushing the DMC because I believe in it. And Representative Norton and Liebling and Dr. Narr, don't sell Rochester short. I live in Preston, and we find lots of things to do in Preston. It's a great town, and once in a while we go to a movie in Rochester or something. Don't sell yourself short in Rochester. I mean, you know, I'm so fortunate to live where I do, and we're very fortunate to have the Mayo Clinic 40 miles from my house. Because I'll tell you right now, folks, it saved my life with quadruple bypass surgery. I don't know who the doc was. They said he didn't have a good bedside manner. I said, I don't care. Can he do surgery? They said he's the best. He came in, the surgery went perfect. He said, came to my bedside, he says, everything went perfectly. Any questions? I said, no, and he took off. Never seen him again. And I really don't care. He was awesome. I mean, he was great. So I love the Mayo Clinic. I want this to move forward. But it kind of reminds me of the abused being blamed for the problem. I'm getting beat up here, and it's my fault because I was pushing for DMC. I don't understand it. So the punishment, the reason that you want to take the $5 million is punishment because I pushed the governor, and I congratulate the governor. I thank the governor when he appointed Tina Smith. After I made my comments, he appointed Tina Smith. And I'm in the paper saying, awesome. He must have listened to me. I don't think he really did, but he appointed Tina Smith, and that's a really, really good thing. So just for the record, I want to be very clear. This is very, very important to me in that the $5 million in the Greg David's Good Neighbor policy was not a stick in anyone's eye. The people of Rochester agreed to that. They voted for it with over 62% in the affirmative. And now we're talking about breaking that trust, redoing that law. I mean, I can see the headlines, and I'm going to get this on the record so we're very clear. The headlines that came to mind: Mighty Rochester and Mighty Mayo Clinic crush the hopes and dreams of small-town Minnesota. But you know, that's not the right headline. Because as we know, the Mayo Clinic has said, don't do this. We do not want to redirect the money. That's Mayo. Now, if I'm saying something wrong from the groups I'm going to mention, please let me know. I'm not going to call you all down here and run you through a bunch of questions. But first of all, the city. In this article, the mayor said, we don't support this. And I'm referring to taking the $5 million from the Greg David's Good Neighbor policy. That's what I'm referring to here. The city, the mayor says, don't do this. Don't do this. The county, I don't know if there's anyone from here, the county doesn't want us to do that, from what I understand. Now, if I'm wrong, I'll stand corrected. We have representatives here from the chamber. The chamber of Rochester has been very, very clear, don't do this. Ready. As far as I know, they don't support the redirection. And some will say, well, the Mayo Clinic, Jerry Williams, former superintendent of schools, says, don't do this. The voters said by 65.2% that we support this policy. And as far as I remember, during the whole election campaign, the Greg David's Good Neighbor policy never came up as a problem. Not that maybe there's Larry the editor, I'm not sure. They could have. I could stand corrected on that. Then we hear from the folks that want to take that money from our small town EDAs. They say, well, it's poor tax policy. Well, what does that mean? Is a fourth-tier income tax that we're going to have, is that good tax policy? Is a fifth income tax tier that the House is going to do, is that good tax policy? So I don't know if we want to say, well, we don't want it because it's poor tax policy. Well, that poor tax policy passed the legislature and was signed into law by the governor and it was voted on by the citizens of the city of Rochester. Now, I had commented that I was going to have a series of amendments developed to take out each piece of the Rochester sales tax, the U of M, RCTC, Winona State, the roads and bridges. But then I'd be just as bad as they are. So I haven't quite thought through that whole thing yet, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do there. And Dr. Noseworthy is absolutely right. Here's the article on the 49 states want Mayo. You know what? So do I. I want them. And they're not threatening to move. They're not moving their base, their headquarters out of Rochester. We're talking about the expansion, is what we're talking about. Well, some have said, we need that money from the small towns to pay for the $585 million. Let's do a little simple math here, folks. $585 million that I'm supporting in the original form of the Norton bill, and you're going to take $5 million, crushing the hopes and dreams of small-town rural Minnesota. Less than 1%. Less than 1%. That doesn't get us there, folks. That doesn't get us there at all. So I just wanted to be clear that it was never, you know, it's just amazing to me. Giving Rochester $134.5 million, largest in state history ever, and then the $5 million for the Greg David's Good Neighbor policy, $139.5, as a stick in Rochester's eye. That is amazing to me. And then to blame the abused who's trying to get this thing moving. Folks, if I was tax chair, which I'm not, I get it, I understand my position in life, but if I was, this bill would have been signed by law by the governor by this time. We have less than 5 weeks to go. We have to get on with it. And if I'd stop talking, we could get on with it. Madam Chair, thank you very much, and I look forward to the debate. And I support this plan, but I do have to say for the record that I cannot be on a bill that takes $5 million that was a bill passed by this legislature, signed by our good governor, voted on by the people of Rochester, not supported in any way of redirecting that money by the city, the county, the chamber, Reddy, Mayo, former Superintendent Williams, and most importantly, members, the voters. The voters voted for this. What kind of precedent are we setting if we go in and take that money? Now, some could say, well, Drazkowski and Davids have a bill that redirects something. We're not touching the $5 million. The $5 million is $5 million. There were a couple cities that were missed. And so that's what our bill does. So don't get our bill confused with taking that money away from these small towns. So I do have one question for Representative Norton. Do you support redirecting that $5 million for the DMC?
Representative Norton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Davids. And it's great that you've been a champion of this bill. And as you well know, there is absolutely nothing in this bill that talks or touches that $5 million. That seems to be a fight among members of this committee. And I don't serve on this committee. I support the DMC bill as it is currently proposed, and I support the DMC bill in the efforts that were under, that are under discussion right now, and it does not contain that $5 million.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for that. And I have to be very clear here that I cannot be on a bill that takes money from small-town Minnesota, as a certain member has been wanting to do and said that it will be done. It says in this article, and it's written by Heather Carlson, so you know it's true. She's one of the best reporters there is in this state. And it says that it will be included in the tax bill. I don't know if the fix is in, and I don't know what's going on, and I think the Senate does not support this move. This is very important. This is very important. From the senators I've talked to, they think this is nonsense, that we would do something so foolish. And so it might be in for a while. It goes to conference committee, it's trade bait, and it goes away. Well, during that time, my name will have to come off the bill, and some other Republicans have been talking that way too, and I want this to be a bipartisan bill. But I can't be on a bill at any time that takes that money. So, but I'll ask my question again.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Representative Davids.
Was that necessary? That was a bit ungentlemanly.
Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll ask the question again. I want to know, as this thing moves forward, do you support redirecting the $5 million from the small towns? I'm asking you. Yes, you're not a member of this committee. You are a member of this legislature. Do you support that?
I support, Madam Chair and Representative Davids, the Destination Medical Center bill as it is proposed. It does not contain that provision at this time. I support the Destination Medical Center efforts that are underway with staff, and it doesn't contain that. I don't know how much more clear I can be, and this has become apparently a campaign issue for some folks for the future. It is not part of the Destination Medical Center bill, which I support and I brought before this body.
Madam Chair and Representative Norton, that was unfortunate, your rhetoric of this being for campaigns. This is not for campaigns. This is to do something for the state of Minnesota, for the city of Rochester, greatly benefiting southeastern Minnesota. Now, if you want to use it for a campaign issue one way or the other, that's certainly up to you. This is not a campaign issue for me. This is an issue that we have a very, very important bill before us that we need to get passed, and we need to do it now. And I'll tell you what, you take the Republicans off the bill, you can certainly do that. You know what? It really doesn't matter. Because if this thing fails, it's because the Democrats didn't support it. You have control of everything. You have the House, you have the Senate, you have the governor's chair. If this thing doesn't go, it's because the Democrats killed it. That's what the facts are here. You don't need my support, and you have it up to this point. You probably don't want it. But I am fully supporting this. But I cannot be on a bill that takes money from 17, 18, 19, 20 small towns around Rochester. So this issue isn't going away, so you can dodge it today. That's fine. Did a good job. But this is not a campaign issue to me. This is a matter of life and death, because Mayo saved my life. And you're probably not too happy about that, but they did. They did. And so to say this is a campaign issue is certainly unfortunate and below members commenting on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, again, it's unfortunate that here the second speaker is delving into an issue that's not part of the bill. We came before you today to discuss the provisions of the bill as we presented it. That's what we should be talking about, and whatever kind of match goes on here, I've not heard any of this. I don't serve on this committee, and apparently it took place at some other time and place, and that's where it belongs. Right now, I have a bill before you. I had hoped members would concentrate on the provisions of the bill that need to be answered in order to gain your support by the members here that are either consultants or Mayo Clinic employees or the city or the chamber. We're happy to answer questions about provisions in the bill and not be distracted by things that are happening outside of this bill in the committee at a different time.
We're going to pause for a second here. Representative Liebling is looking to be recognized, and I am going to recognize her. And just so the public who may be following along understands, often when there's been a history in this committee that when a member cites another member's name, they're usually allowed to respond. So I am going to call on Representative Liebling, but I do think it's a really good use of time that after we go through these pieces, and I have no idea what Representative Liebling is going to say, because maybe she's got questions for the proposal. But I do want to thank all the folks who are here from Rochester and the supporters of the project who are waiting to hear more about the bill. So I'm going to recognize Representative Liebling, and then we're going to jump right back to the next on the list will be Representative Earhart. Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members. And I just, first of all, I wanted to say that for those who aren't used to this process, this is the tax committee, and we often have these kinds of discussions, and especially I think when the press is here, things can get a little wild, and people are aware that everybody's watching, and today we know the whole state is watching. So there's I think a little political messaging going on here, and that's really unfortunate. I think it's even perhaps a bit of a hostage taking, although I know that is going to be considered a pretty inflammatory term as well. But I just simply wanted to say, and Madam Chair, similar to what Representative Norton said, that we're here to hear about this very important DMC proposal. And I just would appreciate it if we could turn our attention to that in respect for the people who've come to testify today, with respect to the people watching who want to hear about that proposal, and kind of keep our personal issues maybe for another day when we can discuss those more fully, and they will be. There's no question about that. They have been before, and they will be again, but today is not that day. And so I think that with recognition from all the members, however they feel about the proposal, that it is a very important issue for the tax committee and for the state as a whole, and to please allow the testifiers to continue, and let's talk about what we're here to talk about today.
Thank you. Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious. I saw the headline this morning, 49 states. I didn't get a chance to read the rest of it. Do you happen to have a list of those 49 states? I'd like to know. Are Utah, Wyoming, South Dakota, are they offering?
Columbia. Madam Chair,
Dr. Narr.
Representative, I'm not aware of any formal discussions or commitments. We do have patients from all 50 states and 130 different countries in the world. So I think that it was a statement that was made that I read also, and I'm not exactly sure of the details other than that.
Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to suggest that if you are interested in improving your infrastructure, your roads and so forth, that you begin asking the governor now for the funding for that, because it may take 6 or 8 years before he acquiesces to, if he's around that long, to the things that fund roads like the gas tax. So if, in fact, you are concerned about the infrastructure, and apparently you are, I would suggest that you run a parallel course and start asking for that about now. And the other thing I wanted to mention was, you mentioned there are some legitimate places that you may relocate, or the possibilities are. You're concerned about the amenities in Rochester, and I can certainly understand that, having been there. It's a nice town, but it's mostly doctors walking around talking to each other and not a lot of fun. So I would think that, why don't you move something adjacent to the Twin Cities where we have all these amenities? You like Minnesota, you could stay here and retain the name Mayo and all those things, and you wouldn't be a lot less expensive for all the infrastructure and all the amenities you want. That's the question.
Who would like to take that? And I think Mr. Dunn or Dr. Narr, it's something we have talked about in some of the meetings we've had about, other opportunities for infrastructure that might already be there in other parts of the state. And kind of the trade-off with sunk costs, but, maybe you can, I think, Representative Earhart was having some fun kind of kidding around there, but I think it's a legitimate question that people have asked. Have you considered kind of moving to some other location?
Yeah, I've done a lot of interviews with different people that are trying to get me to say what's wrong with Rochester and what are you going to do with this money in Rochester and what's going to happen. And the things that I like to emphasize are, for my particular situation, being there for 33 years, raising 4 sons with interest in sports and interest in youth athletics and interest in music lessons and interest in the civic sorts of things that they could participate in, we've got a great city. The issue is we're attracting people like the technical person from Boston. We're trying to get doctors that are trained in the best institutions around the country. And they usually come for a while, and they really hone their skills because of the size of our practice, and then they leave. And I think in the intermediate term, if we could magically have not even light speed, but just faster ability to get between the University of Minnesota or St. Paul or Minneapolis or the airport or wherever it turns out being, up and back in one day without what I had to go through today traveling on the icy roads, I think, that's another option. But we're looking at something relatively quickly. We've all heard about the Affordable Care Act. I think this committee knows that that's of interest to us because the Supreme Court ruled that that is a tax. And that Affordable Care Act is moving Mayo Clinic's cheese in a big, big way. We don't know how reimbursement is going to change. And so we think that we're on a relatively shorter time scale than we could usher through a major change to make sure that we relocated or had transportation differences and things like that. So it's a big question. It's something we've thought about, and we think this is the approach that we can act on the most quickly.
Mr. Dunn, did you want to add on to that? I think part of the question is, why not have this happen in Block E in Minneapolis or in downtown St. Paul or in Duluth or in Bloomington? And I think Representative Norton wouldn't be carrying the bill if that's what it was. But if you want to comment, because we have had some of those questions in the past, Mr. Dunn.
Madam Chair, it's an excellent question. We've talked a lot about those sorts of issues, and what's totally unique about Mayo Clinic in the world right now among the handful of international destination medical centers is the Mayo model of care is really built around the concept that you centralize the elements of care that can deal with the most sophisticated problems in healthcare today. The other international players in healthcare are approaching it in a very different way. They're branching out around the world, and they're going to more of a decentralized model. So for Mayo, the opportunity is to really build around the medical center and put all of the expertise in one location. That's the mindset of how you get the highest quality of care. To do that, there's obviously been a massive investment that's been made in Rochester for well over 100 years. That's the best opportunity for Mayo to build on its model, which is totally unique in the world today.
Thank you, Representative Norton. And then after Representative Norton, it's Garofalo, Les Schoen. Representative Norton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Earhart, I would just say, each city in Minnesota is unique, and we all have things to offer. And the Minneapolis-St. Paul, I'm up here 5 or 6 months a year, and I love it. St. Paul's a great town. I hop over to Minneapolis often. But Rochester's a great town, too, and has a lot to offer, just as St. Cloud has its assets, the Iron Range has its assets. All of us would say our community has those assets that we're proud of, and it doesn't mean that because we have great assets we should move them all to the Twin Cities because that's where people are. We need to develop the rest of the state, and I think those of you from outstate Minnesota are forever raising that banner in committee, every committee. What about outstate Minnesota? How can we grow outstate Minnesota and not just sink all of our efforts and money into the Twin Cities? So this is no different than that. We have a jewel down there in Rochester. It's small. It needs some polishing, and that's what we're trying to do with this.
Okay, thank you. Representative Garofalo.
Madam Chair.
I'm so sorry. Representative Earhart, I apologize. You were still...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually was going to offer up Edina. And the reason we have, exception of Olmsted County, we have more doctors in Edina already. So, and we have a huge golf course. We have 3. But there's a huge golf course that I was going to offer for site. I mean, I think they'd go for that if you consider that. And you're 10 minutes from the airport and so forth. And, there are other possibilities.
Thank you.
Good answer. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm thinking that if this keeps up, the consequence of this being on statewide TV is the voters are never going to vote ever again. Just a couple of comments before I ask my question. First of all, I want to praise the folks from Rochester for one decision you've made so far, and that is that you chose the absolute best possible author you could for this bill in Representative Norton. A lot of times, whether you like it or not, the merits, the assets or liabilities of the proposal are almost as important as the author you choose. And you made an excellent choice in having Representative Norton as your author. She's doing a fantastic job. She's working early, staying late, and trying to make this happen. And you should be complimented for that, and just be aware she's doing a fantastic job. And I'm not just saying that because she's my friend. We're in different parties, but she is literally the best author you could have chose for this bill. The point I would make, and it's something that I've voiced concern about before, and I want to make sure everybody in this room is understanding, is that in order for a project this large to happen, I believe you have to have bipartisan support. Regardless of the Democrats have total control of state government right now. Everyone knows that. But the reality is you need Republicans and Democrat votes. And if this provision goes in the omnibus tax bill, if you take the Rochester proposal and you tie it to a bunch of goofy tax increases, it's the one way you can kill this bill this session. And I would just implore the author as well as the advocates for this proposal that you want this thing to be going by itself. You don't want it getting caught up in regional fights, in taxation fights, in philosophical fights. Because if you take this proposal and you tie it to an income tax increase and the other proposals flying around here, there ain't no way I'm going to vote for it, and I can guarantee you I don't think you're going to see another Republican vote for it, and you got a math problem. So that's just, again, a little bit of praise, a little bit of criticism there, but please be aware of that dynamic. My question for the author or for the advocates is this. Huge economic development opportunity for the state of Minnesota. You choose the time frame, whether it's a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year. What does this mean for jobs in the state of Minnesota? That's what this is supposed to be about. What are we talking about for additional jobs in the Rochester area, secondary, tertiary benefits? How many jobs is this proposal going to create to get some of the people in the state of Minnesota off the benches and out working? Thank you.
Representative Norton.
Thank you. And I believe in my opening testimony I talked about 25 to 35,000 jobs, around 1,500, a little more or less, annual jobs in construction alone, and that's annual over the lifetime of the 20 years. So I don't know if anybody here wants to talk about specifics, which are direct and which are indirect.
Sure.
Please, yes.
Madam Chair, those are the numbers, and this is about jobs, and it's about growing the tax base in the state of Minnesota. Over a relatively short period of time, 10 to 20 years, you're going to see job growth upwards of 30,000 new jobs. What's important to understand is because of Mayo's investment in the medical center in the last 15 years, you've seen that pace of growth. What we're talking about doing is maintaining that pace of growth given the massive investment that's going to be made here. And the growth will be higher in the future, but it's not multiples of the growth that you've seen in Rochester before. So it's important because it's a proven model. In the last 10 years, 15 years, you've seen roughly 15,000 new jobs created in Rochester, Minnesota. What's interesting about this proposal is I could not point at one single economic development effort in the country today that will generate this level of job growth and this level of tax-based growth as one economic development initiative. I couldn't identify one that even comes close.
Representative Gavel.
Madam Chair, to the testifiers, so we've outlined sort of the positive scenario here of whether it's this bill or some sort of incentive package to get the project moving forward. We've outlined the good scenario. Let's flip to the other side here. What's the downside? Let's say we decide not to act. We say no, or for whatever reason it doesn't happen. We've outlined the best case scenario. Let's outline for this committee, not that you're threatening the state of Minnesota, but for the members of this legislature to understand what's the downside, what's the consequences of doing nothing.
Representative Garofalo, are you saying, you're clarifying that what's the opposite of if we don't pass the bill? Or if we do pass the bill but the growth doesn't happen?
No, Madam Chair, what I'm saying to the testifiers is if this legislature and this governor do not take action on this proposal, we do not provide some level of incentive package for the destination medical facility, the center. What is it? What's the worst case scenario? What's the downside? Because we've outlined the positives that can happen, but it's also important for members of this committee to understand what the downside could be.
Whoever would like to take that one.
Madam Chair, Representative, I'm on a hot seat because my CEO talked about 49 states this morning. We are big right now, largest employer in the state. We function as a hub for 19 hospitals across southern Minnesota and up into Wisconsin as what we call the Mayo Clinic Health System. And we believe that the millions of people that we serve in that area are going to continue to need to be served, and I think in the great state of Minnesota, they're going to continue to increase in numbers. So what we have right now, we're committed to. The question, as the Affordable Care Act comes into being, is where is it going to be the most logical place for us to grow? Because right now we're facing these questions as one Mayo Clinic with 4 sites. Florida, Jacksonville, Arizona, Phoenix, the Mayo Clinic Health System in Rochester, Minnesota. And so we as an entity are making decisions for the Mayo Clinic as a whole. And I think that that's where the conundrum is going to be. Where are we going to grow in the future? And this will help us grow in the state of Minnesota. And I'm very committed to Minnesota. I don't want to go anywhere. I don't have any bugs on my windshield right now. It's my home. And I think there's something very special about the state of Minnesota, and you guys know that because you represent all of it. The heritage and the work ethic and the people that we have here make our clinic very, very successful with third and fourth and fifth generation people working at the Mayo Clinic again. So I don't want to think, what if? I cannot threaten this group and say, if this, then that. No, I'm not in that business. I want the Mayo Clinic to grow in Minnesota.
Thank you. Representative Garofalo?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just I think it's I appreciate your comments and thank you for not engaging in putting a gun to our heads and threatening. I just think it is important to matter that in the 21st century, a lot of businesses have the opportunity to deploy capital and resources where they want to go. That resources matter, and this is an important factor in the decision-making process for your organization in the years and decades ahead. And I hope we do the right thing and we make something happen this year to keep you in Minnesota. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, the only thing I knew about Rochester when I was growing up is I lived next door to a guy named Roger Quartz. Roger Quartz was a union carpenter. And Roger Quartz used to talk about going down to Rochester all the time. This was back in the early 80s. So clearly you were doing something down there at the time. Now, never mind Roger Quartz used to steal our tennis balls from his bushes, and he'd keep them. He wouldn't give them back to us because we'd play hockey against the garage door. And Roger Quartz would mow his lawn with his shirt wide open, and I'd walk around like I was Roger Quartz when I was like 7 years old. But he was in Rochester all the time, and it had to do something good. He was able to own and build that home next to us, and it was an immaculate home. So I know you were doing stuff down there then, and I'm wondering, when did you, and so you were clearly expanding in Rochester back in the early 80s, when did you decide, Dr. Nahr or Dr., I don't know the other doctor next to you?
Bob Dunn.
Oh, you're not a doctor?
Not a
Okay, that's a doctor. When did
Call
you
me
decide?
Dr. Norton and I could try to...
I've called you other things. When did you decide to expand to Florida and Arizona?
Dr. Nahr.
Madam Chair, Representative, I went to Rochester in 1980 to start my training. And the decisions to move 25 years ago into those two markets had to do with how the federal government was going to reimburse for medical care. We were extremely concerned at that time, our leadership was, I was but a young man, that they were going to regionalize health care, and that if you were not in a particular region of the United States, you would not have access to patients from that region. So we had patients that had properties there, and we assessed the entire nation, and we elected to kind of divide the 49 contiguous United States into regions and say where would it be most likely for us to be able to attract the right number of patients to keep this machine going. Those practices are about right now about 1/5 to 1/6 the size of Rochester. They don't do any kids in either of those practices. There's no obstetrical services in those practices. They're unique as their own kinds of destination. However, there are a lot more organs to transplant in Florida. So the solid organ transplantation programs of Florida have been the highest ranked in the nation, above even what we're doing in Rochester. during this last year by independent observers. So that decision was made based on what we thought was going to happen to medicine reimbursement as a whole, mostly at the federal level.
Okay, Madam
Okay,
Chair.
Rep. Lesh.
Dr. Nair, is it fair to say that that the amount of elderly, or as you say, number of organs to transplant are increasing, continues to increase today in those two markets?
Dr. Nair.
Madam Chair, yes, absolutely. We know 14,000 people per day are hitting Medicare age. We know that for a variety of reasons, like what happened last night and today, people like to be in the warmth once they hit age 65. And so those patients are gravitating to the south, and those markets for older patients absolutely are increasing, and they're big cities. So,
Okay,
Madam
Rep.
Chair.
Lesh, please.
So, and I appreciate that, and I think that's true. I think it's also fair to say that no amount of tax subsidy passed by this committee is going to ensure that Minnesota has 7-degree daily highs in January. It's just, that's where the people are going. So part of what we have to look at in this committee is the reasons you made the decision to expand down there. I don't recall you asking for a subsidy back then, and you still expanded down there. I don't recall you asking for a subsidy to expand in Mayo in Rochester, and you still did it there, which is good, and we appreciate that we have Mayo Clinic here. But I'm looking at these subsidies here, and I have a list of, because this isn't our first rodeo in the tax committee. We've seen these requests for years. I'm going to skip over Twins because that was a loan from the state. They got their other money from Hennepin County, but I'm looking at money that Minnesota, state of Minnesota, actually appropriated. Now, Northwest Airlines in 1991, I recall the numbers being in the high hundreds of millions, 800 or 900, but I know part of that was stripped away because they didn't follow through on their promises. They didn't follow through on building the operation they were going to do. So it's down to like 375 million. We've got ethanol subsidies to private industry at $215.3 million. DRI in 1998, 2000, $40 million. Medtronic, 99, $39 million. Mall of America, $19 million in 1987. Now, in 1985, we bid for the Saturn plant. Saturn was pitting different states against each other. I think they ended up in Tennessee, I can't recall, but we bid $900 million in a combination of incentives for Saturn to come here, and we didn't get them. They went somewhere else. But I'm wondering, with this being clearly in the highest portion of anything the state of Minnesota has ever given any public or any private industry, we have to ask some tough questions about the incentives and why we're doing this. And I'm a little frustrated, I have to say, Dr. Nair. I know you're in the hot seat because of things your CEO said last night. I was very surprised to see those. And when I started out, like I said, the only thing I knew about Rochester, Mayo when I was young is Roger Courts. Later on, I visited there for conventions, and I was a rear detachment commander at the company down there for the National Guard for a while too. So I knew that about Rochester. And now, learning about this process, the only thing I see that I know about Rochester, other than what we discussed here, is your CEO going out to the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. and wagging a finger at the Minnesota legislature. That's what it looks like to me. And I read that article, and I was thoroughly disgusted. And I know you didn't say it. And I know it's hard to come in here, and you can't say this about your CEO, but I'll say it. It was a dumb thing to say. It was dumb, dumb, dumb. This is not our first rodeo. We've had to weigh these kinds of considerations in the past, and we look at it critically. These are taxpayer dollars. And we've also been shortchanged in the past. We've also given money to private industry based on promises upon which they have reneged. And so we have to look at it, and I know you're serious, and you say, we're going to do this, we're going to dump this many billions in. Well, that's what Northwest Airlines says, that's what a lot of other companies have said. So hence the questions. That's all I'll say, and I appreciate your answer to the question. Because I know we're looking at a plan B, there's going to be other financing options in this. But I can tell you, my support went from neutral and considering, and after seeing that article, it plummeted. That's all I have to say, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Lesh.
Madam Chair.
Members, okay, yes, I'll let Representative Norton respond. We only have this room for about 10 more minutes, and then we have to switch to another room. We're sorry. So we'll take Representative Schoen and Hansen, and then we're going to recess. We're going to come back to the next room, and hopefully folks here on the DMC can stay with us and join us again because we have more questions, if that works okay for you, Representative Norton. And I know after that we'll be looking at stadium issues, but we want to finish with the DMC today. So if we can continue on into room 200 after we move. But first, we're going to take Representative Norton, then Schoen and Hansen. Representative Norton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to respond to Representative Lesh's comments and just clarify again. We keep having to make this clarification. This is not money, going to a private industry. It is money going to the city to invest in city infrastructure, public infrastructure. So it's very different than those other projects. That's number one. Number two, the model that we have presented a long time ago now, so you may not remember, and the new model, we're trying to make certain that this is the case again. Mayo invests up front. The private investment happens up front. Once that private investment is made and a trigger is set, then and only then does the state release the authority to let bonds. So we are at little to no risk. Who's at risk is Mayo Clinic and the private investors who are going to give it their best and start the work on this $3 billion and plus 2-point-some billion in private investments in our community, and we're following that, planning in advance, mind you, but following that with the public infrastructure investment. So just know that it isn't going to Mayo Clinic. None of the money goes to Mayo Clinic. It goes to build up Rochester's public infrastructure to support their investment.
Okay. Representative Schoen.
Madam Chair and Representative Norton, you might have touched on my question a bit because I was still curious about who's determining the need and then when. So I understand this is for municipal projects. This amount would not include the improvements that maybe would need to be met at Highway 52 or any of the other state highways in the area for that. Is that correct?
Mr. Dunn?
Madam Chair, Mr. Representative, that is generally correct. The concentration of the dollars that make up the $585 million have been outlined in an infrastructure master plan that's been established, and the concentration of those dollars is centered around the urban district anchored by the Mayo Clinic in downtown Rochester.
Representative Schoen.
Madam Chair, I'm supportive of the idea of what you're doing. I would like to see some more questions answered about Rochester's municipal buy-in, and maybe those are forthcoming at some point. You folks do wonderful work, and I'm passionate about the U of M hospital, and I'm passionate about Mayo being a part of Minnesota as well, too. And I'll save my comment on the 49 other states. I think you're getting enough heat on that, but I do echo a bit of the concern related to that comment. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hansen.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. We've had a lot of discussion on a lot of things. I had a couple questions about the bill. One, how does this affect the Civic Center? As a member of the legislature, we've made a number of tours, and how does this relate with the whole Civic Center feature? And then secondly, is the airport currently part of the city of Rochester, or is it within the city of Rochester, or is it outside of the city of Rochester?
Madam Chair,
Representative Norton.
I can just start with the Mayo Civic Center. The Mayo Civic Center was a request that came from the city of Rochester. It was pre-DMC, if you will, and yet if you look in the handout that you were given on this very fine line sheet, it outlines $1.4 billion in expenses that are about infrastructure, and if you carry that over to the end, you'll see what DMC funds are going to be used for. It was, I believe, anticipated that this project would be done already. It was a city request from many years ago, and the funding mechanism was also dealt with a number of years ago, although it seems to haunt us by coming back up here year after year here. But they work in concert. The city, of course, has been planning its own development prior to DMC, and so it links with DMC and the growth of the DMC project, but it also, despite or, with or without DMC, is something that the city of Rochester asked for and needs and wants as well. So they're separate but related. And no, the DMC funds are not used for that. That is counted on in past legislation, in the bonding bill, and in other sales tax extension money that's already been let, and other resources from the city. And so then as far as the airport, does someone want to touch on the airport?
Is there someone from the city or the county or not sure?
It's a city-owned airport. Mayo may have started years ago. It's a city-owned airport, but as far as the boundaries of city and county, I couldn't speak to that. It's within the city limits, we're hearing from the crowd.
Representative Hansen?
I'm trying to speak so I can look at hopefully people can hear me, but my reason for asking the airport is kind of following up on Representative Dabney's question, because we can build things or we can provide the subsidy, but folks, someday we are going to probably have a commuter train that connects Rochester to the Twin Cities, and there's probably going to be a train that goes from Rochester to Chicago. And if we look at the long term here, instead of the immediate term, we're going to have a different world. And how do we just keep rebuilding things? So I would hope, if the dollars go, that the capacity is built in the infrastructure for expansion and hookup, if the state has to link to it. If you're going to have a fixed transit line from the airport someday, and if the airport's going to be larger someday, and if we're going to have commuter rail to the Twin Cities that goes through 52, through my district someday, that we think about the long term and that we plan for that and that you invest in that as well. So we don't have to come and tear it up and redo it and tear it up and redo it and look at the long ball here. That's my reason for asking that. I don't want to rebuild the Civic Center because it's being rebuilt again or something, because we didn't look the long term. And I think what I'm hearing Mayo say is they're looking at the long term. So let's look at the long term and the long term costs and the long term benefits if we are going to do this.
Okay. Dr. Nar?
Madam Chair, just one comment on that. So Mayo's been heavily involved in this, trying to leverage Mayo Clinic assets to make sure that we have a cogent proposal to some of the different issues we're trying to address. Most of the buildings that Mayo has built during the last 10 years have been built in such a way that they could double in size. So the Gonda building infrastructure footing is so that it can go twice as high as it is right now. The structure and footing of the heavy proton beam is built so that there can be a bed tower or whatever other kind of expansion that we have there. So it's part of our culture as an institution, because we've been growing 1.5% to 3% over the last 80 years. Now we're growing a very big number, and that's part of the problem, because the smaller city can't keep up with it. But yes, I think your comments are absolutely appropriate and will be taken to heart.
Okay. Representative Hansen. Okay, we are going to recess to room 200. We're going to start up at 2:30, 29 minutes, and Representative Myra is next on the list. We are in recess.